Hello, my name is Ian Mackay, and I'm the 2021 president of the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. VIREB is a nonprofit, member-focused organization that provides services to approximately 1,100 realtors in an area that ranges from the top of the Malahat to the northern tip of Vancouver Island. Today, we're delighted to sponsor the upcoming session, Applying Doughnut Economics and How Local Government Can Lead Economic Development to Fit the 21st Century. Nanaimo is the first Canadian city to adopt the Doughnut Economics Framework to guide all city initiatives in building a thriving community that is environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable. In this session, Carlota Sanz, co-founder of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and City of Nanaimo councilors Tyler Brown and Ben Geselbrecht will discuss how Nanaimo is applying the principles of Doughnut economics and how local governments can leverage their resources to lead the kind of economic development that meets the many challenges we face in the 21st century. Thank you for attending and supporting the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance Summit, and we hope you enjoy the session.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. I would like to begin today by acknowledging that I live and work on the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking Coast Salish nations, in particular the Songhees and the Esquimalt. Very proud to live and work alongside them every day. Our session today is going to be a follow-up to an address given earlier today by Carlota Sanz, the co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So the drift of this is how local government can lead economic development into a fit for the 21st century concerning Doughnut economics. So Carlota spoke about that earlier today. A couple of Nanaimo councilors, the city of Nanaimo is actually moving forward with this plan and this strategy. Tyler Brown and Ben Geselbracht, who are both councilors from the city of Nanaimo, will be joining me for this session in just a moment. It's presented to you, by the way, by the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. So just for a bit of a recap, Carlota, can you go over sort of the highlights and the high-level view of what you said earlier today? Carlota is with us. Nice to see you again. Welcome. Also joining us today is Ben Geselbracht, who is a councillor for the city of Nanaimo, as is Tyler Brown. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to you as well.
Yeah, so I brought in the vision of Doughnut Economics, offering the donuts as the compass for guiding humanity in the 21st century, where the new goal that we offer, the Doughnut offers, is to meet everyone's needs within the means of the living planet. So I think that's the starting point. And of course, how can we address that, right? So I brought the big ideas about moving from dynamics in our economies that are degenerative by design to regenerative by design, but also moving to economies that are far more distributive than the ones that we have inherited in the 20th century. And I also, showed and explained, tried to explain a bit and give a flavor of the work that we're doing in the Doughnut Economics Action Lab in turning these ideas into practice. And so how we've been creating tools and frameworks that can be used and applied in different contexts, in different areas, of course, cities, towns, education. And so I just tried to give a bit of a flavor of the work that we've been doing, as well with some examples of how that has been adopted in some places around the world. So I think that gives pretty much a bit of a snapshot of what I try to bring to the audience.
Yeah, another term that a lot of us have heard quite often is the circular economy, as opposed to Doughnut economics. Both are round, both are a circle. They align and they converge. There is synergy between them, but is there a fundamental difference between the two?
Well, more than difference, I think that circular economy, it's a fundamental piece to get us into the safe and just space of the donut. So Doughnut economics calls for, as I was saying, changing the dynamics in our economy. And one of the dynamics that we need to change is this one of linear and degenerative industrial systems. So we've inherited economies and industry sectors that are based in a linear system. So we take resources, we make them into stuff, use them, and throw them away. And we need to transform this into a regenerative and cyclical system by design. So this is where circular economy it's key. And so that's the circularity side of things for Doughnut Economics. I think that where it's not that we differ, it's just that where we complement, or what Doughnut Economics brings, is a wider vision. It's an umbrella, I think, where it's not only becoming regenerative by design and calling for circularity, but also looking at becoming distributive by design. So the social, right? So we bring the social and the ecological together. So we also need to call for dynamics that move from a divisive dynamic. So we have inherited as well economies that tend to concentrate value in the hands of a few. And we need to move into economies that distribute value and opportunity much more collectively with those who co-created. So I think that Doughnut Economics includes, let's say, circularity, and we're working alongside with a lot of collaborators and partners and amazing innovators and change makers that are really innovating in the space of circularity, which is for sure one must have if we want to definitely get into this safe and just space of the donut.
Yeah, you also talked about sort of flattening out the donut, if you will, and make it something more linear. We'll unpack that a little bit later on, though. To bring this a little closer to home, Tyler and Ben, the city of Nanaimo is adopting the idea of looking at the Doughnut economics model. So let's talk, Tyler, I'll begin with you. How did that come about in Nanaimo? Tell me about that process.
Sure. So both Ben and I were co-chairing the environment committee that the city of Nanaimo Council had struck fairly early on in our term. And it quickly became apparent through conversations at the committee level, with members of the public and staff, that the city was doing a lot of different things with respect to the environment. But it wasn't clear. I think it was probably very clear to certain staff members how it all came together. But ultimately, as we're talking with members of the community, you're trying to bring people along, involve people, there was a real gap in coherence among just the different sort of environmental initiatives that we were doing. And then one of the members of the committee sort of brought forward this idea that we need some sort of comprehensive framework. Parallel to that, obviously, like many cities, Nanaimo has a lot of social challenges, a lot of folks living rough, and those that are experiencing homelessness, and the impacts that has on individuals, but also on the community and neighborhoods. And so there was a lot of parallel discussions, and it became very clear that a lot of what cities do is broad, can be nebulous at times, and their mandates are quite large, right? They're tackling many different things at many different times, and it became very apparent that what we were struggling with at the environmental committee about how it all pieces together and how we make decisions could be expanded for almost everything that we were doing. And we needed a framework that would start to give coherence to all the different items that cities embark on and they try to tackle. And they're interconnected, right? A social problem isn't necessarily just a social problem. It has an economic element, there's environmental elements, and this goes many different ways on many different issues. So Ben and I, in conversations with members of the community and other councilors, really started to put our heads together to tackle these problems. And it became very quickly apparent, at least from my perspective, that and Ben's perspective, is that the Doughnut economics was the only framework that we were discovering that linked all these issues together, provided that coherence that we were looking for while giving a vision and direction, and also having a huge and important component around intersectionality of all these different issues and how they're interconnected. So that's at that point, we brought it to the Environment Committee and also Council for more general discussion. And ultimately, there was some good discussion. There was obviously some dissenting viewpoints that I think people are aware of, but it was adopted by Council as the framework for all our initiatives, and most importantly, the Reimagine Nanaimo process that we have going on right now, which is reviewing many plans, from environmental plans to economic plans to our official community plan.
Yeah, within the discussion, I'm sure a lot of points were made, and Ben, I'll go to you for this one. The vote in council, for example, was not a landslide. It passed by one vote. So what do you think it was about the conversation that had some not voting in favor of this and some saying yes to it?
I think a lot had to do with just the timing of it. We wanted to bring this framework in that was going to really help align our efforts towards the big challenges that we're facing and really integrate across our city departments. And we were in the process of doing an official community plan update where we'd mobilized a lot of resources for public engagement, consultants and that. And in order to make sure that staff and we're working on this framework, in conjunction with the OCP development, that we had to pass this motion to use the donut as the framework sooner than later. And I think that left a gap in time to really sit down and work through what the donut economics means. And the book that Kate Rayworth wrote that really analyzing our understanding about economics and how it's been applied. There's a lot in there to unpack. And the biggest thing is basically, what is the economy and what's it in service for? And I think previously there's been this idea that there's, you work the triple bottom line, environment, social issues, and the economy. And the economy in reality is not really an entity in itself. It's a tool, it's a means to get where you want to go. And it needs direction. And so what the donut does is just really reframe that. What we're trying to achieve is work within these hard limits, these hard ecological limits, and also provide the things that we need in our society: shelter, food, health services, education. And our economy is our vehicle to achieve those things. And I think in understanding that and changing the frame from what things have been for the last 30, 40 years, I think that for some, it takes a while to shift. But I think at the end of the day, everyone's values are very aligned with the direction that we're trying to go. And it's just a matter of your understanding.
And when you talk about all the elements there, Carlota, in your presentation, you talk about no one being left behind as far as food, water, education, which people sometimes don't consider. Education means you're making informed decisions and wise decisions. Like the people who don't believe the science behind a vaccination. I can't figure that out really. But when this session is being sponsored by the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board, housing is an issue that's become very fundamental in people's survival, especially here, as the cost of living has increased exponentially, some would say, over the period of time. But let's talk about that balance. What is the fit with housing within all of this to make it something within the donut economic model?
Well, that will depend for sure. In each place, it will mean a different thing for sure. But I think that cities also need to reimagine what is their role also in making sure that that housing is provided in a way that gets to all. And so there's when we talk and when a lot of what we've been doing in applying the framework of Doughnut Economics is actually giving a tool so that we can explore what would it mean to reimagine the way in which we construct and in which we build our houses and in which we actually give access to people to these houses, having into account the various different social issues that are interrelated, as Taylor was saying, but also the impacts in the environment. So what are the changes and the deep transformations that need to happen in the housing sector so that we are building accessible houses for everyone in our city with a completely different way of constructing houses, of course, right? So it needs to, like, the way in which we bring housing into the city is going to transform. I think that in talking to the different cities and places that we've been exploring this framework, I think that what I keep hearing is how empowering the framework is in actually exploring the question. So what does it mean to the new type of housing that we want to bring into the place where we live, right? And that is a question for each of the cities, and of course, who owns the land, who owns the housing in a city, and how can we create more and more social and affordable housing for everyone here within the means of the living planet. So materials, use of energy, how all of that needs to be transformed if we want to be building the places where we live for the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, on the island, we have passive houses are being built. The use of mass timber is happening more and more all the time as a way of addressing all of this. Houses are being built with larger window spaces, meaning less electricity. So there's all those things that are coming together. How can we talk, Carlota, in terms of this expanding past Nanaimo and beyond Nanaimo? You know, other major communities on the island.
In the country or something, I mean, within the
geographically.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting question, and we are exploring as well. What does that mean? It's interesting to see. I mean, we launched Doughnut Economics Action Lab a couple of years ago, and since then, well, we started creating the frameworks and methodologies together with the places that were kind of pioneering new ways, and so that it could allow places to actually bring these ideas into practice. And what we're seeing is that, you know, we've been sharing the methodologies, sharing the tools, sharing the stories of others, doing so that it can really create this sense of peer-to-peer inspiration. And what we're seeing is that across the world, it's very interesting to see the different levels at which places and countries are choosing to engage with the framework. So I think we can definitely see that cities and the level of a city have like stepped forward. There's something about I don't know if it's the powers to act of a city, at least in Europe, or the size of the cities. They are becoming really like stepping forward in terms of being agents of change. But we're also seeing national governments engaging with us, engaging with the ideas, inquiring what would it mean this for a national level or at a regional level. I'd be very interesting to see a pioneer that steps in where there's different levels in the same place. So I can think actually Brussels, where we've been doing a lot of work with the region of Brussels, and we have had conversations as well at the national level. And so we are also, this is a space that we're pretty much learning what would it mean, because of course a city or a town, I mean, each of the places has limited power to act, right? So the very interesting question is, how can cities work with the different scales within the nation to actually bring about this change? And the frameworks that we have created and that we are creating and innovating and adapting surely apply to the very different scales, and they can be used in various scales. And I just love to see, if actually in Canada, actually maybe you're going to be some pioneering case in which, we're seeing those levels working together with this same framework, because I really think there's a lot of potential when all of these levels come together.
If I may, Bruce.
Yeah.
I think you ask a very important question there, and from a city perspective, using the example of housing that we were talking about just a moment ago. Undoubtedly, everybody knows here that we have an affordability problem, and that has consequences. But at the same time, if we're applying Doughnut thinking here, we know we need to provide housing cheaper, or allow people to enter or supply. So at the same time, though, we're confronted with environmental, the biggest environmental challenges of humanity's given time here. So in the city of Nanaimo, we know that 89% of building GHGs in 2050 will be from buildings built from 2021 or previously. And that 65% of our building stock, current building stock, will still exist in 2050. So we need to provide more housing. We need to provide it in a more accessible way for many more people, but we also need to be able to respond and rise to the challenges of these environmental scenarios that we are facing. And so in the city of Nanaimo, we've been, a lot of our policies actually have been working to reduce GHGs across the board. But when it comes to housing, we've seen over the last several years increased supply of natural gas for heating, which as a consequence has basically canceled out all those other successes, as we have clean backend in BC Hydro, more or less. But when folks are using natural gas, and I use this as an example, when we're using natural gas, we're actually failing to meet some of our environmental goals because of that one item. And we as a city cannot regulate that. We are 100% dependent on the provincial government to place those regulations. So the provincial government has made great steps on numerous fronts, especially on the housing in terms of investment. But that's where we really need that more comprehensive discussion and a more interconnected framework at the provincial level as well to assist us meet those very important shelter and housing goals, but also the consequences of some of those provincial policies on our ability to respond to environmental goals associated with housing.
It's interesting, when you take a look at this and how it's being undertaken around the world. You should Amsterdam, Brussels, Copenhagen, Nanaimo. It's interesting to see you in that sort of company. So Ben, how do you define the success of this, of the Doughnut Economics model? What has to happen in Nanaimo for this to be considered successful?
Well, I think it all starts with setting a clear vision and purpose, and then building in these targets and goals that are measurable, because you have to be working with an honest assessment of where you're at, and then what gets measured gets managed. And so we're setting very clear goals around targets for our greenhouse gas emission reduction. We're looking to, reduce our waste, increase our waste diversion to 90%, or reduce our waste generation by 50% by 2030. We're looking to protect X amount of endangered at-risk ecosystems in town. And then on the social side, we're, looking at targets around, percent vacancy, reducing, eliminating homelessness. And also very practical things about setting targets for building neighborhoods that have a certain level of walkability, that you can access your basic needs within a 5-minute walk. And those are all things that reflect affordability. There's also things around a certain level of job availability or diversity of sectors within business. Once you kind of know what you're shooting for, then you're able to build as you go. Like, we're all trying to figure out how to do our part in building an economy that works within the environmental limits and can meet social needs. And that isn't a roadmap that has been clearly laid out. But if we're working from a clear set of metrics and being honest with ourselves, we can do what we can. The city's part, we can create regulations and support other actors within our community, businesses, individuals. And then also, we know what we can't do. We'll be very clear that we hit a roadblock and we need provincial action, and we'll be very loud as a municipality advocating for those things, because it does require change at all levels. And so I think those are the critical steps. And we're already seeing it applied in our community, where we've built this framework with these different targets, and we've been evaluating different land use scenarios based on how well they do in meeting our goals as a community. And there's a report card, and so that's kind of where things have started.
Yeah, the idea of a report card, or again, I'll put this back to you, Tyler. Measurables. Is there anything you want to add to what Ben just said? I'm going to go on mute because they're apparently building something on the roof of my office here. I don't know what it is, so I'm going to go on mute.
That's okay. I don't know if you can hear it, but I have 2 toddlers running around as well. No, I think Ben really covered it well. And, within any given category, you're going to do your best to find key performance indicators and try to apply data and metrics to, it's important because it'll show you if you are directionally correct in terms of your policy mechanisms. But at the same time, there will be limits to what you can do. And I think it's important just to lead with values, because at the end of the day, values are what people can see themselves in and bring themselves along, and find where they can align within their, whether they're a business, whether they're a social enterprise or anything, social agency or an individual. So the value, putting the values, that's what's sort of beautiful about the donut, is it puts the values right on the forefront. It makes it very clear what those values are. And then from a policy perspective, of course, we want to figure out, what are we doing, and can we best track it to know if we are working towards and seeing those values actually realized, making them more than just words on paper, but something that we're achieving.
So in terms of those KPIs, Carlota, what have other cities around the world seen as the timeline for this? Some have obviously moved a little quicker than others. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, climate has a bearing on this too. We have the best weather in Canada, right? So that gives us an advantage over other places. But talk about that in terms of other cities and how quickly they've been able to achieve measurable success.
Yeah, well, this is a great question. In fact, we've had a deep discussion just before with our team as well. You know, around what does it take for a city to actually say that they want to move into the space of the donut and the ambitious that says. And I think that, Ben and Taylor just like really spotted on, first of all, of course, we want to see a clear vision, a radical vision, and the donut is calling for a deep transformation, right? So this deep transformation doesn't happen immediately, right? So there's a time frame there, and we are, as Ben said, learning. It's an inquiry as well of, can actually cities live within the donut? It's a question for everyone, and it's what we need is more and more pioneers that actually work with us in implementing and figuring out what does it mean in practicality. And ultimately, of course, everything will show up in the metrics, right? And so I have and well, in the metrics, and let's also say, I think that it's also important to say that a deal, especially when we created and we started figuring out what kind of tool to best downscale the donut into a place and to help city governments use these concepts. I think that initially or the first step was not to move completely like straight away into metrics, but of course to really engage in a deep reflection of what like changing the mindset into a new paradigm would look like. And then, of course, let's create a tool that allows us to put metrics in it. So actually the 4 lenses, the city portrait that I've been presenting this morning, that is a tool that allows cities to put to start putting in a more quantitative targets in there. And we need to also recognize that some of the data that is needed to actually measure some of those targets doesn't even exist yet. So we are building those data and we're building those methodologies. So in terms of a clear frame timeline, I don't think I think this cannot be measured. Okay, in 5 years, we will be seeing exactly this. But of course, what we're seeing is what cities, like for instance, Amsterdam, what we're seeing is that, okay, we cannot have exact data we don't have yet. We're moving into this monitoring system, but what we can start doing is to act very ambitiously and radically in the regulations and the steps that we're putting forward now. So for instance, Amsterdam has a very big ambition to become 100% circular by 2030. Now, I mean, what that means, we yet don't know, because that's, it's a huge ambition, but they've already put also a very immediate regulation, which is, well, by 2023, they need to have like at least 10% of the materials used within construction in the city needs to be circular. So they're setting an ambition now that hopefully will send a message and a signal towards the transformation that they want in the future. So yeah, it's this balance of acting now and recognizing that, of course, a lot of that transformation is going to be showing up in a few years. But I'm also very interested in seeing what we're seeing that is happening is that more and more places and city governments are engaging and are eager to find new ways of undertaking a new vision for the future. And so I think that in the next 5 years, I hope that we're going to be seeing it's patterns and learnings of what that means in terms also of data, in terms of hitting those targets. And we will also learn a lot about the barriers that these cities are facing, right? Because as we were all saying, each level has they have some power to act, and so there's going to be a moment to recognize that there's a wider change needed also at a global system, at a global level. So yeah, I think I'm very interested. We're very interested to really work closely into learning more. What does it mean for a clear timeline, right? And I like what Ben said. Yeah, this obviously. We're pioneers, so we're we're really learning together. And I really hope, yeah, we're already seeing interesting patterns. And that's what Doughnut Economics Action Lab actually it's all about trying to work with these change makers that are going one step beyond, and also sharing their stories, right? And sharing what's happening so that it can inspire others in taking the same action.
So now let's talk about the money. We're at a time when we are in recovery from the COVID pandemic, and within any crisis, there are opportunities. And people talk in terms of economic recovery. I think it also needs to be talked about in terms of economic transformation. In its broadest terms, the green economy is not just something about the environment, it's about the economy, because it's something that will be injecting transformation, innovation, and frankly, revenue, money into systems that are managing all of that stuff. So any or all of you, let's talk about that. Tyler, can you start that off with us? Let's talk about the economic benefit to doing this right now. Certainly the planet is at risk, and that's why it has to happen, but the economic benefit to this too.
Sure. I'm hesitant, I think I would like to engage with that question a little bit differently. And I think it comes back to what Ben talked about at the beginning here is at the end of the day, economics is an activity to deliver on something, right? We don't, and this is not, I don't think, rooted in any sort of leftist ideology. It goes sort of fundamentally to sort of Adam Smith here around, the purpose of economics is the creation of something. And so as we talk about recovery, I think it's opened up a lot of interesting dialogue about what we want for our future and what we want our economies to deliver on. And fundamentally, I think most human beings subscribe to the exact same values around what we want for life. We want to be able to follow our creative pursuits. We want to have health and safety and all those sort of things. And now we know increasingly that the activity that we've pursued in the past is up against and confronting hard ecological limits. And we're getting clearer and clearer pictures of what that is and how we define this. So as we focus on recovery, I don't think we should we should be focused on the things that we want to see in our society and then align the economic activity to achieve those. And I think sometimes people want to overlay, quick, easy talking points about ideologies are, and that Doughnut Economics puts this forward. And I don't think it's as simple as that. What Doughnut Economics is asking us to do is adopt some principles that allow us to be adaptable to respond in different contexts and different geographies and those sort of things to achieve those goals. So in certain aspects of what we do, degrowth is probably what is going to have to happen. But in other areas, it's going to have to be looking at new and innovative ways to achieve those goals. So, so all that to say, I think that I sometimes think when the conversation shifts to focusing on the economy, it comes back to that point Ben made at the beginning, is we lose sight of what actually our economy is, and that's to provide for our home and the people in that.
And I think it's important that we hear the toddlers and the kids in the background, because we are doing this for our future and for their future too. So that's a good reminder of that. Ben, I'll go over to you with that same question now.
Yeah, I mean, taking a big step back, it's just the question is like, can the current way that we're set up, our economy, can it deliver on meeting these critical things that we have to deliver on? Like, we don't really have much of a choice in meeting our greenhouse gas emission targets as a globe. If we don't, it's like the cost and the social chaos is uncalculable. I look in Nanaimo, it's like we have a homelessness, addictions and health crisis happening. And as our economy, are we able to organize and deliver on dealing with this? And I think what we're seeing is like, there are some serious roadblocks in the ability for government, for business, for all elements of the economy to respond. And so we need to just set the goals and move in that direction. And I think, I hear, analogies made with the climate crisis to the mobilization of World War II, is that there was a war that needed to be fought and needed to be won. And we mobilized all different elements, municipalities, province, business, to shift the economy so that it could produce the things necessary and mobilize the community necessary to win that war. In that process, there's large transformations and a large amount of jobs and creativity and innovation and wealth was generated. And that's an outcome of when a society picks goals and strives for them, and jobs and wealth and innovation is a byproduct of shooting for your goals. And I think that's what we see, is that if we really go for it, we're going to see a transformation in our economy that is going to be able to provide, because the whole goal of what we're trying to achieve is to provide for our communities and live within our means. And so that's kind of how I'm orientating to that question.
Carlota, you've heard the same around the world from other places, I'm sure.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm delighted to hear from Ben and Tyler that are actually trying to bring it in their place. And I mean, it's just that it's really how you engage to that question, because the starting point of Doughnut Economics is that the goal of the economy should be to meet everyone's needs within the means of the planet. Now, how you get there, that's a question. And what we've seen is that definitely we have inherited an economic system, economic models that haven't done very well in that sense. And I showed this morning as well the picture where we were seeing how much in overshoot we are in planetary boundaries, but at the same time, how yet we haven't managed to meet the people's needs in the world, right? And we need, so I think we said, well, we have a problem, an ecological crisis, and we have a social crisis. So it's also about, yeah, inequality and how wealth is distributed, and how that is also having an impact in overshooting planetary boundaries. So we need to flip the question. So it's like, yeah, what are the dynamics that we need in our economy to actually meet the needs of everyone, which obviously includes, as I was saying, good housing, good jobs, peace, justice, education, and for that we need to redesign, because what we're seeing is that we have inherited an economy, businesses that have been designed only to maximize profit return. And what we need is to massively accelerate in creating enterprises and in industry and economy that help us to come within planetary boundaries while continuing meeting the needs of all people. And I think that is a big ambition, but we're seeing more and more people stepping to that, right? And so, of course, it does call a deep transformation of what we understand by economy, by success, by what's the shape of progress that we want in the 20th century, right? In the 21st century. So all fascinating questions and challenging questions, because it does, of course, as we're saying, there's not a clear, input-output solution to this. We need to engage, and we need to engage with all sectors in society to see what this means for everyone.
And just
I'm going to put it. Oh, sorry.
I think Ben hit a really good point there around, past. We have examples from the past about how we can reform what we're doing to rise to a specific challenge. And the World War II one is a great one, because the scale of it was huge. But if when we look at the home front in World War II, obviously there was those making courageous efforts overseas to fight the war on the front lines. But this country as alone, and this is not my own ideas, it's been well spelled out, but they created over 20 new economic institutions to respond on the home front to rise to the challenges of, in this case, war. So, I think, was it C.B. Howe was the minister in charge of that. So we have examples of how we can creatively transform and find new solutions that didn't presently exist to confront a challenge. And I think that's what our current time begs us on numerous fronts. And there's going to be so many different ways that we can solve all these different problems, that I personally believe in human creativity. We'll figure it out, and and it won't be a business as usual approach. In certain aspects, it may be, but in many different ways, it's going to be really transformative and very innovative, and something that we can't even think of right now or within the next year, but it will emerge because we are very creative animals, and we will figure it out.
You know, I'm also going to say that we don't have to look much further than First Nations and Indigenous peoples who have inhabited this planet for millennia, long before we came along and screwed it up. So, you know, the consultation with them, certainly here and across the planet, has to be integral to all of this stuff. Ben and Tyler, Carlota, please, anybody, just tell me how that part of it fits into the equation, the Indigenous peoples.
I would just say, I think in Nanaimo, that's probably the big hole in our donut right now. We hope to start a conversation, and that conversation will continue, but ultimately where that goes needs to be co-created with many different people. And I think very importantly in the time that we live, and the challenges that we've been given, calls to action that this country has been given. We need to do better in how we engage and consult and ultimately co-create our path forward.
I can jump.
Carlota, sure, go for it.
I mean, absolutely crucial. We need to bring that wisdom and learn. You know, we need to learn from Indigenous cultures, as we need to learn from and not only consult, but as you just said, Tyler, co-create, right, and bring that centrally. So it was really amazing to actually see coming through our platform last year a reinterpretation of the donut from the Maori Indigenous people, and how they saw that donut, and it was so powerful, you know, to see what does this all mean to them. And in Doughnut Economics Action Lab as well, we are really more and more trying to, I mean, we've been working in the global in global north cities where maybe there was you didn't have the situation like Canada, but certainly we really are keen to explore, how can we bring much more of those voices into, you know, there's this concept of decolonializing economics as well, and so how can we bring these voices in the adaptation and reinterpretation of what that all means to them as well. So I'm just glad that, like, so it's so good that I can hear this. I also as a question, right, and as a recognition that there's something we need to work there in, and definitely a crucial point.
Yeah, Ben, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, it's an extremely important consideration. I mean, I just think, you know, here in town, along the inside of the island, the ENN land grant, you know, thousands of hectares of land that was taken away from First Nation communities, and the wealth that was, you know, from coal and from forestry that was extracted from it was not distributed back to the communities. It was taken, you know, and concentrated in private hands, and that's really left some very deep historical inequities. And I think that if we are really truthfully going to engage in developing an economy that's healing for the planet, and also one that brings equity and restores, you know, past harms and relationships, this is a fundamental question. And I think probably at the heart of what does it look like to build a truly, you know, donut economy. And so I think that this needs to be at the forefront.
You know, and we're going to wrap it up here in a second, but another significant part of that, when you take a look at the footprint that we have on the planet, we have an enormous number of non-Indigenous species here that are both plant, animal, fish that were brought in for recreational reasons. Most of the rabbits on Vancouver Island are an introduced species. We have fish that are in freshwater on the island that are not Indigenous to this place. Every spring we have this explosion of a plant called the Scotch broom, which is yellow and it's everywhere, and it's choking out all of the Indigenous life that's around here. That upsets the biology balance of the food source, plant source for animals. So that is also something, I guess, when we're dealing with the planet, Carlota, we can take a look at that, the actual physical footprint of introduced and non-Indigenous species.
Yeah, of course. I mean, throughout the donuts and in the different ecological boundaries, you can do that, but also throughout the 4 lenses of the donut that we're offering and we're co-creating with cities. There's a question around, well, what does it mean for the city to be part of their ecosystem, and what would it mean, to respect, but also to mimic how nature works in that natural habitat and ecosystem. So it's there, and I think that's what I find very powerful of Doughnut Economics and the donut as a framework for looking at all of these challenges that, in a very powerful visual, it's almost like there's an opening space for a collective conversation about all of these issues that we're seeing, and we can see how they're interrelated and impacting each other. So I definitely invite you to use it in the whole extent.
I've had the privilege of being able to speak with First Nation chiefs and elders, to hear stories from them about their ancestors, their own elders within their community now, to talk about life and what it used to be like around here before all of the things that we put in place to represent progress in our terms is not similar to progress and success in their terms. And I think we have a lot to learn from all of that. Anyway, we have some people that probably have some questions and answers and want to step into this conversation. So why don't we move into that part right now? Thanks again, by the way, to the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board for sponsoring this session. So we'll now move forward with your questions and answers. And we have quite a few of them. I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit here. So I'm going to go through as many of these as we possibly can in the course of what's happening. Thank you all again for being here. So let's go back to the very beginning. We've had quite a bit of things come through, actually. For municipalities, gentlemen, this one is to you. What does circular procurement look like? We've touched a bit on that, but talk a little more on that if you would, please. Ben, you go ahead.
Great. Yeah, this is something that we've started to look into in the city of Nanaimo, and we've established a sustainable procurement policy. And within that, there are some principles and evaluation tools to ensure that our procurement follow some principles around zero waste and circular economy. And what that looks like is in the purchasing procurement policy, what's being purchased is evaluated on the amount that it contributes to, end of life to landfill, how it was created in terms of levels of greenhouse gas emissions used in it. And as the municipality and the ability grows to get more detailed in the analysis of the supply chain and end of life of material, the more you can tweak it. So basically, the circular procurement is all about using and procuring in a way that will contribute to that overall circular economy vision that keeps materials out of landfill, that eliminates pollution and waste, and regenerates the natural environment.
Okay, Tyler, anything you want to add to that?
I think Ben covered it good. I would just say that there is an existing paradigm that you operate in as you go out for tender and things like that, and the way you can sort of structure your procurement of goods and services is to ensure that all things considered equal, companies that are making bids that are scoring higher on sort of social and environmental goals would be awarded the contract. So it's sort of this is what we're seeking, and anything above that is putting you into a category where you're more likely to secure the contract.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we had a couple of questions and comments about Indigenous engagement, which I think we covered off for the most part. You identified it as being the hole in the donut right now. Well, in any sort of a crisis or anything like that, there is an opportunity, because Tim Hortons proved that, because they took the hole out of the middle of the donut and turned them into Timbits. So there's always some chance of something good coming of that. And thank you for your comments on the Indigenous stuff. Another one here, I can see the Doughnut economics model helping the homelessness issue. People don't seem to understand that if you can house people successfully, it benefits everyone. However, there seems to be this pushback that people on the street are lazy and don't deserve it. So the inclusive nature of this. Tyler, do you want to weigh in on that?
It's definitely a complicated item, and it's at the intersection. But I think a lot of different items in the donut, from affordability, poverty, to addictions and mental health, and a lot of those categories. So I think what the benefit of the donut is you start to see that those intersections very clearly as you start to implement policy and evaluate it through the lens of the donut. So ultimately, the donut is a framing tool to guide policy decisions, and it's also a communication tool to show how everything is actually very interconnected and oftentimes interdependent. So, ultimately, whatever your actions and your policy actions are going to be something that helps with the social issues facing our city. But as we can see, and I think the question as framed is a good one, because it is suggesting that these items aren't easily just black and white, right? They're nuanced and they're multifaceted, and any policy response and any sort of compassionate response is going to need to be nuanced and multifaceted to find solutions.
Okay, Ben, anything you'd like to add?
Just around homelessness, there's a long pathway to get to that state, and there's an erosion sort of in the social fabric that usually starts in childhood, and that's why in our social metrics, and the donut is looking at things like education, housing, access to health, and these are all things that we need to be supporting and reinforcing. So one innovative thing that we've come up with the city of Nanaimo is we've created an arm's length organization to address homelessness and health and housing. And that's going to be a coordinating entity at the city between the service providers, province, to really focus on those goals and do everything that is within our power at this level to move forward, and then advocate for the things that we need.
Okay. We're going to get into some stuff about the RDN here in just a second, the Regional District of Nanaimo. But there is a question here about the areas in the region surrounding the city, Lanceville, Cedar, Yellow Point, any of those areas, they're not within the governance of the city, of course, but are there conversations about this on that much? We talked about island-wide briefly, but the adjacent communities involved in this conversation at all, Ben?
I think that that's a great question, and a lot of the aspects of the donut we are working on at a regional level. For example, we've set a 90% diversion rate for our waste from landfill, and a very ambitious target. But the actual formalizing it into a framework that the regional district applies hasn't occurred yet. And it's something I think a discussion and a dialogue that would be helpful to have as we go forward, as there is definitely interest.
Okay, Tyler?
Yeah, just add, I think there's already a lot going on that will really benefit the intent here in Nanaimo, and ultimately it would be awesome to see it grow to the regional district or further, or have other municipalities. I think, just cognizant that we are embarking on something new, and maybe not wanting to take on more than we could handle to begin with. And so at the city level and at the council table, that seemed the more appropriate place to start to put some of these things in place, and do a little bit of figuring out before making it a little more broad. But undoubtedly, from everything from agriculture to, where the city gets its water, and those types of transit and sewer and all those types of services, they are connected and they are regional services, and ultimately we need to take them into account, and ideally it would be really lovely to get them all under the same framework.
So getting back to the RDN here, a question and comment. The RDN is providing funding for landfill diversion projects. Can the panel speak to some of the funded projects and the potential for other regional districts to use this as a tool to support the circular economy? Tyler.
Actually going to shoot this one to Ben, as he's a little more knowledgeable on this than I am.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I mean, this is a really good example of a local government setting an ambitious goal for something that's needed to be done. And so the regional district set a 90% diversion of waste from landfill. We're currently diverting about 65% of our waste. So it's quite a goal that we need to achieve. And within that, there's a variety of different programs that we're working on implementing to get us there. One is mandatory source separation regulation in the regional district for commercial, industrial, institutional enterprises. And another example of initiative is a $300,000 innovation fund for nonprofits in partnership with businesses to implement programs and initiatives around waste diversion. And so, this year we had a group from the Gabriola. They hired a market developer to look at what they could do with textiles, and they developed a series of products and then started manufacturing, with industrial sewing machines, dog beds, and a sound barrier, sound insulation panels. And another one was expanding an area in Habitat for Humanity for reuse and repair of materials. And another one is expanding the food collection capacity for our food. The name is escaping me.
I know a place. It's like that they do gleaning and they do food prep.
Loaves and fishes. Their ability
to food bank.
Collect, collect food waste from the grocery stores and a reprocessing facility. And so these are all things that are really developing our capacity to keep materials in use, eliminate waste, and regenerate natural systems.
And I can't think of the actual name of the other place either, but it used to be on, I think, Wakasaya, and it was a house, and there was a community garden and a community kitchen, and they would teach people to can and preserve things. And
food share.
Yeah, that's
Food share.
Food. There it is. That's the one. Okay, still kind of related to this in a way. It seems like glass recycling will become more of a major issue going forward, especially with the adoption of solar panels. Is this type of challenge being addressed in Doughnut Economics? Tyler?
I think that one is a little bit above my ability to answer,
Okay.
So just to be fully honest there, but I think where we're trying to set the goalposts at the regional district is if we are generating waste in this region, as citizens, as industry, as commercial entities, as communities, our goalpost is that we will properly dispose of it. And by dispose, I'm not suggesting landfill. Where we're trying to get to it ultimately is beyond waste. That if it is glass or any other, if we're using solar panels, we'll use this product as an example. If we're using solar panels locally and it reaches its naturally end of life as the product it was originally manufactured for, it's being disassembled, reused, and ultimately remanufactured. That source material is being remanufactured into a new product, so it's not landfill. I can't answer that question, directly about the very specific product, but I think, we can use that product as an example of what we're trying to do with goalposts. And then the program that Ben just touched upon before is ultimately we're going to need a lot of that innovation to occur outside of government. We're being as innovative as we possibly can be with our policy tools and our incentives and our regulations. But ultimately, we're going to be really dependent on, for that 90% diversion, we're going to need a lot of private sector, private industry to reimagine what normally would be considered waste into an actual another product stream that can be remanufactured into something else.
Ben, anything you want to add to that?
I think Tyler really hit on the important principle is that we've set a goal and we need to continually being honest with ourselves and doing audits on where we are tracking on towards that goal. And if we're seeing, when we do a waste audit at the landfill, that there's a bunch of glass in there, and we're hearing from the community members that there's trouble for access for glass recycling, it's our responsibility to step up to the plate and make sure that there's something in place to deal with it. And I think glass is something that we're seeing a growing gap in its accessibility for recycling, and it's definitely on the radar of the regional district to look at what we can do about it.
Okay, thanks, guys. Carlota had to leave us, by the way, folks. She's actually in another time zone. To be specific, she's in Europe. So there's things happening in her life that she couldn't join us for this part of the program. What else we got here? What could support for Nanaimo's Doughnut policies look like from the province and the feds, provincial and federal government support? Ben, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think one of the main principles for Doughnut Economics is first to set a vision and a set of goals that reflect trying to meet the ecological limits being within them and the social foundations. And I think a very important thing that the province could do is to set its own framework that reflects the provincial level of responsibility. And I think that's primary. Then from there, there's multiple different facets that the province could be supporting. And, you know, the list would be very great to go in, but as an example, for the circular economy, there's a whole variety of at the provincial level programs that are developed that it's not possible at the municipal level that will collect certain materials. And there's a shared pool and a collection system. And so, you know, expanding those would be an example of a provincial policy that would help move forward Doughnut Economics, passing legislation around right to repair for used appliances, so that there's a law that makes sure that warehouses and stores will carry used parts. Those are all things, you know, just in that small thing, you know, you could go into greenhouse gas and then into the whole social side of things. And maybe I'll pass it over to Tyler. There's specifics that he would like to give examples on.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I would love to see the province, whether it's Doughnut or something similar, where they're developing comprehensive frameworks that show, you know, how their policies are tackling some of these issues and appreciating the interconnectedness and interdependence of them. But undoubtedly, there's going to be areas of concurrent authority and concurrent concern where, and I'll use the example of housing, right? And so, you know, in the city of Nanaimo by 2050, you know, 89% of our GHGs will come from buildings built in 2021 or prior, and 65% of our existing stock will exist in 2050. At the same time, we know we're going to need to be building new housing. We know we need to be building affordable and supportive housing. And both the federal and the provincial government, and, you know, thankfully, even more so, we're seeing the federal government re-enter that realm and providing funds for, you know, socialized and supportive housing. So, you know, if we apply Doughnut thinking there, what we absolutely need that housing, and we need to be providing affordable housing for our existing residents that actually don't have that. There's a good chunk of them or barely making by, but also the future residents that we know our population is going to grow. But at the same time, we have that GHG issue. And so, you know, I think if we are all working together, the city, the province, and the federal government, we would be building right now net zero housing, that housing that we desperately need for the social aspects, but also connecting them to our environmental goals to make sure that we're heating them with clean energy. They're insulated to be as efficient as possible, and the materials that we're building them out of are as environmentally as responsible. So I just use that as one example where you know, it's concurrent authority, or there's a concurrent interest there, and you know, having that unified framework at multiple levels would really help us meet both the social aspects of the Doughnut and the environmental limits that we know we must respect.
So still with housing, another issue that often comes up is the permitting process for getting building permits in place. Could a small measurable ambition be to outsource or hire more people to ensure that the backup in issuing building permits is dealt with?
Yeah, I think 100% that is an issue, and it has ramifications sort of in building social housing. It has got ramifications for getting businesses, you know, that are in the community that want to start up, get the renovations done that they need to. And it's something that has spillover effects in multiple locations. And I think that it's really important to again, in those situations, set a target, you know, of where we want our turnaround times to be, and to do everything that we can and to do that, you know, be it hiring more staff, looking at the process, you know, by which it goes through, and collecting, you know, input from the people that are using that, from businesses, developers, individuals, on how to improve the system. And you know, the city has taken this quite seriously and is implementing you know, a review on this, and it definitely more needs to be done.
Okay, Tyler.
Yeah, I think, you know, Ben hit a nail on the head. There's more needs to be done. This is something I take a couple of calls on it a day, I would say, just about, it seems. And I think there's this impression that always developers that are pushing for quicker timelines, and that is true, but it's interesting. A lot of the calls I take are from very small businesses, and they just want something as simple as a tenant improvement, or even social agencies that are trying to build housing or to implement a program. So I know this is not just a unique problem to Nanaimo. There's been a confluence of factors that produce the situation that we are in, but ultimately I think it falls on local governments to find ways to innovate and respond to the best of their abilities. And there is an overlap here with the provincial government again around changes they've made to the legislation that sort of governs how we operate in this space. But within that, also obviously we can maneuver as well and respond and work with our community partners. So I think there is room for improvement, undoubtedly, and the city of Nanaimo, both at staffing level and the council level, has committed to trying to find that improvement, and also advocate for changes at the higher level to give us, to better position us to respond to these challenges as well.
And I think it just, back to a really important principle is that there needs to be a shift to more outcomes focused and outcomes management. And, with our permitting processes, be very clear, what are the goals are we trying to achieve? There are some environmental goals, there's some social goals, and then there's goals in terms of, having reliability for business and development, and make sure that that's very clear, and then not be too attached to the actual processes that may have historically been in place, but not to be scared to innovate that in a way that will meet our goals, yet make a system that does work for everybody. And I think that's what the donut does call for, is to be outcomes focused, and then have a mission focus. The mission is to meet these objectives and not be too tied to the specifics on it, but to finding a process that works.
There's a session tomorrow I'm moderating, actually. It's called Seizing Economic Opportunities in the Energy Transition. This is where the whole conversation about, for a long time, it was economy versus environment. One or the other, where's the moderate territory in the middle? Those lines are getting a little bit blurred now as people starting to get the point about global warming and all the rest of it, and climate change. However, in Nanaimo, it's kind of a political process because the city is putting this in place. How much engagement and traction have you had with the business community, who of course have to be a part of this to make the process go forward, but all of those who do embrace this kind of stuff with climate change and doing donut economy and that sort of thing? But what about business? What do you hear from them? Tyler, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think some folks have concerns, and they reached out, which I really appreciate. They had concerns and they've reached out early on, and there's been some good dialogue. And then there's been folks that have been highly supportive. And I think when we can have that dialogue, and we need to look for more opportunities to have that dialogue. And I know in Amsterdam they have a whole coalition around businesses and community groups that all come together, and they're figuring this out. Ultimately, I think that's where we need to get to in Nanaimo as well, whether it's exactly like Amsterdam did it, or a little, to the Nanaimo context. So, for example, at the, Mayor Krogh, Nanaimo established a leadership table, and there's a subgroup of that around having this very conversation about, how does the community fit into this, and how do they see themselves, and how do they participate? But I think the important thing is when we have these dialogues, we can actually identify things that just some existing businesses are doing that make really good business sense. So for example, a way to grow your economy without consuming in a more responsible way is through something called, what's often referred to as import replacement, taking a product that we're currently getting elsewhere and producing that same or similar product locally. So, you're seeing the localized benefits of that. The money is staying within the local economy. Usually there's certain jobs that go along with that. So I think there's a wealth of opportunity that we can start to discuss with businesses that actually we realize we're all at the same goals around creating wealth in a responsible way that best serves our community. And that's what I have found is, even if people are very just really excited by this, or they have some concerns, usually through dialogue, and very quickly we get to a place where we actually realize, hey, the goals are aligned, and a lot of what we're doing already fits with donut thinking. We just need to tweak around the edges and we find even more alignment. And to me, that's the really exciting part. And you know, the amount of conversations, you know, it's interesting because when we passed this, you know, I remember a developer company out of Vancouver within a couple of weeks had called me and said, hey, we've got $1 million that I need to spend in Victoria, Kelowna, and maybe I'll look at Nanaimo here. What's the land availability for doing a step code 5 type multifamily building? And so those are really awesome conversations, and I didn't expect them to come and happen so quickly.
Okay, Ben, anything you want to add?
I think just keep coming back to, you know, it's incumbent upon the community and the government to set, you know, what we're trying to achieve, and to work in partnership with everyone to achieve that. And it's very clear that there are some serious ecological boundaries around greenhouse gas emissions that are causing, you know, enormous social costs. You know, here in Nanaimo, we're definitely not immune to it with the, you know, the windstorms, the heat dome. You know, there's flooding and forest fires, and it's all related. And then, you know, around resource consumption, and then the social costs around homelessness. And I think that we, as a community, have to just be very clear on what our goals are. And I think most people are in agreement of what those goals are, and it needs to be fact and evidence based, and then have an air of working, you know, together on solving that. And sometimes the pathway, there's disagreement on the exact pathway of getting there, and that's where we just always have to maintain dialogue and communication and tables of collaboration to sort that out, a way that's going to work. But also at every step of the way, being very honest on what we're trying to achieve, and when we're not achieving it, having accountability on it. And I think that accountability that comes with a framework and clear targets is something that we really need to implement, so that we can call each other on when what we're trying to do is not meeting the goals of what we need to do.
I can just provide one example too. You know, this obviously emerged before, but you know, as we've talked about, we've got a highly ambitious landfill diversion target. And if we think back a few years, there was the push to remove organics out of you know, going to the landfill. And there are a whole host of benefits with that, obviously, for the landfill. But what that actually required was a processing facility and a company that emerged that is taking those organics that we're diverting from the landfill and composting them in a way that is making other products. And so those are the interesting conversations where we can really start to see how these goals, combined with community and private sector innovation, really deliver on multiple fronts. And when we can see that clearly when we start to frame it with those principles of the donut and you know, how it all comes together in a cohesive vision.
And I think that's the frame that government needs to start really wrapping its head around, is how can we be an innovative force? And that example of the processing facility is one of them. It's like, we recognize that we needed this facility. It was going to open up the door to a whole slew of different opportunities. But in order to do this, we had to come up with a contract that could attract that private investment. And so we set up a 20-year contract and RFP around being able to have a state-of-the-art processing facility that could, you know, create a certain level of quality of compost material and be able to compost, you know, those compostable containers. So we set a standard of what we needed, and we set up that contract. And look, we're having one being built that's really going to be a leader on the island and allow for you know, economy around organics diversion. And that's the type of innovation that we need to call on in all aspects, and for local government and provincial government and federal government to step up to the plate to help engender and support.
Okay, let's move into the roundtable segment. This is where we're going to get you all to turn your camera on if you like, and if you would like to make a comment yourself or make a point, ask a question yourself, go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go into the gallery format here, and if there is something you'd like to ask or say, please let us know. You can let me know directly through the chat, or you can use that little hands up signal thing that's on the on the on your device. Victoria, go into the three little dots on the top right hand. Look at how technical I am. You go to the three little dots on the top right hand corner, and if you want to raise your hand, you do that, and then I will recognize you and give you a chance to answer your question. A long day already. Do you know that? But yes, if you again, you can go through the chat format, or you can put your hand up, and I will hopefully be able to recognize you through my snappy little iPad here. I guess another thing too that will probably come up, gents, and we touched on this briefly earlier, but what are the signposts? What's the measuring device to make sure that you're hitting the targets that you want to? How will you monitor the success of this going forward? What's that look like?
Our good staff are currently working hard to figure out what those key performance indicators are. So we have some obviously that we can pull from. The one we've talked about a fair bit today is that 90% diversion goal, pretty straightforward. But other ones are a little more difficult to triangulate to and get those KPIs. So staff are hard at work at that, and we're hoping we'll have, they've already been in some fashion, some drafts put out to the public, but we're hoping in the next little while here, we'll have that even more refined and put out to the public for review, comment, and before final adoption.
Okay. Ben, anything you'd like to add?
Just that, your donut framework and the set of targets and indicators, it's an art form and something that needs to be built and constantly under refinement because it's a critical tool. And I don't think that, it's well established, all the tools and how to go about doing it effectively so that it just needs constant effort of fine tuning.
Okay, great. Thank you. Unless my monitor here isn't working correctly, I'm not seeing any hands up right now. But if I'm missing you, can somebody tell me? I have a direct message here. Un momento. A question from the group here. What prevents Nanaimo from accelerating their efforts? Funding, stuff like that.
Like anything, it just comes down to will.
Political will?
Yeah, I think honestly, that's some of it. I think there's also limitations within the legislation that we need, and also within the current funding paradigm for municipalities. I don't have the exact statistics, but municipalities across this country are responsible for an overwhelming amount of infrastructure and delivery on community goods. Yet the taxation regime doesn't. We see a tenth of that the tax dollars in this country. So I think there's a whole host of areas. So outside of will, there's a whole host of areas around reform and how we view municipalities and how we empower local communities to respond to some of these challenges that these ideas aren't my own. There's been many theorists and folks much smarter than I with experience that have said, we are due for looking at reform about how we empower municipalities to respond to everything from social challenges to better supporting businesses to meeting our environmental goals.
Okay, Ben, anything you want to
add? Just building on Will, I think that it's really important to, the first step is really setting that vision and what the goals are and really communicating that to build that support and understanding of those shared values. And then I think, there's any obstacle is just a matter of problem solving around. And, what Tyler talked about, financing at the municipal level, that's something that we're starting to advocate strongly on, is looking so you only can ask so much from communities to raise resources from property tax, and that we need to look at alternative avenues of provincial financing for municipalities. And another thing that Tyler's been spearheading at the regional level is starting to look at where are the limitations in legislation, for the Local Government Act and that relationship of jurisdiction. And I think that this call for reform, it's timely now, and we need to look because we've got to transform all different levels.
So what's the role of the taxpayer here, or if you will, the voter? I mean, through democracy, you're given responsibility to make decisions in connection with what the voters and what the taxpayers want. But what if somebody wants to make sure that this happens, to support this? What can they do? What should they do?
Well, I think at the bare minimum, be engaged in the political process around any vote. I think that's, I can understand why some people can pull back from the system, but it is the system that we have, and the more you are engaged with that, the more the better we all are. Moving on from there, I think it's like I said, that's the bare minimum. I think it's often negative voices are the ones that express themselves and can be minority on any given thing. So I always encourage people, whether it's something I'm doing or whether it's something that's completely sort of opposite of the values that I have, but somebody else is doing it. If you can take the time to put your hands on their back and just give them a voice of encouragement, that can go a long way to giving people the courage to continue to fight some of these fights and go through the daily grind of what change can look like. So, bare minimum vote, and then support. And then if you're really serious, I think, and you really got some time through organization and coordination and getting together with like-minded folks, and more importantly, getting together with folks that aren't like-minded and having important conversations and finding areas of mutual concern, and then seeking mutual solutions that, I often say, nobody's going to get 100% of what they want, but would we all be satisfied if we got 80% of what we want? Most people say, yeah, and that only can happen through dialogue and conversation.
Ben, anything to add?
That's good.
Okay. So I sort of jokingly before said that Nanaimo participating in this means that they're on the world stage with all these other names, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Nanaimo. But that's the thing. I mean, that's a real factor, the fact that Nanaimo is showing up on the world stage like this. So what kind of traction is that getting?
So yeah, I'd like to answer that. First, I want to give out a shout out to John Hankins, who we were talking about this idea, and John's like, you know what? I think if Nanaimo gets involved in this, people are going to be asking that question: what's Nanaimo doing with all these innovative cities like Amsterdam and Brussels and Portland? And he was spot on. That the level of interest in this across the country and internationally has actually been a real big eye opener at how much this is wanted. Immediately when we passed the motion, and Nanaimo showed up in the Times magazine, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has reached out for us to give presentations right across the country, because I think that there's a real deep need for really setting the goalposts of what we're trying to achieve as a society, and then also doubling down and being focused on it and accountable to it. And so I think that being in these circles is just saying that Nanaimo's taking it seriously, and that this community can be proud that we're working to go for it, and to be supportive, because it's only going to lead to greater opportunity and benefit for our community.
Okay, Tyler.
I think, Ben, the appetite has been huge and a little bit overwhelming, and actually having to turn things down because the schedule just can't accommodate them. But I was reflecting on this, is like how awesome would it be, the narrative of a city, a colonial city established for coal production with brutal labor conditions and suppression of Indigenous voices, turns that narrative around, and taking that history and just flipping it on its head and charging into the 21st century with taking how we treat people and being inclusive and the type of industry that we support, from coal to something that I can't even imagine. I think that's a wonderful narrative that I really hope is realized for everybody in Nanaimo and on the island.
Okay, great. A couple of hands are up. Dirk Hademan is currently not taking photographs. He's in this session. But Dirk, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bruce. Great presentation. Love the enthusiasm and love the energy. My only concern or thought is, what is preventing another future council to negate what you folks have set forward? Is there anything that you have set in place that will make it possible for future councils, or make it so that future councils will have to continue this step forward? Well,
I think the success of this is if we can properly communicate it out to the community and get the community on board, so that the future council is a council that will really support this. And that needs to be the focus, because if the community is not on board, obviously we're not tapping into, what are the core values and the direction we need to go. That being said, we're fortunate to be doing an official community plan update, and with the timing to be able to get the donut framework into that official community plan framework, it's established, will be established in some pretty key city documents that do provide a framework for action. So I think that there's a lot of good opportunity to make this initiative be sustainable. And I just received a text from somebody in the South Island saying that their community has actually embedded the donut framework into their official community plan. I know that the City of Toronto is looking at it. It's not something that I think is going to go away, and really just eloquently puts together what the focus that we need to be having here going into the 21st century.
Cool, thanks.
Here's another question. If a municipality or if a neighborhood or whatever it might be wanted to adopt the idea of doughnut economics, do they need government to be involved? I mean, can they organize it and then take it to government and say, what do you think of this? I guess in a way that's sort of how this happened. But if locals that are in a municipality, they're watching this right now, that are not in Nanaimo, and they want to get that going, can they start it and then take it to a council?
100%. And I think it would be even stronger, right? Anything that comes from the community that has folks rallying around something, organizing, committing to principles, that can be, one of the principles that I don't know if Carlota spoke to it fully, but it stuck with me, and I've heard people locally in the community also say the same thing: is on any given thing, you have to go to where the energy is. If you put your energy where there's already energy, that's exciting. And so if folks, I think in Nanaimo, we know what it's like to have a council that doesn't necessarily, maybe have lost their way and aren't aligned with community values or where the community's at, and that's the nature of the system. To the previous question, things can change, but if folks, change happens when people create energy. And if your particular council or your government's not doing it, well, sometimes you just have to do it yourself. And you might find success, you might not, but we have to start looking at. I think the problems that we are facing are measured over years, and that's how we have to look at the solutions as well. You might not find every success, but if you commit to something, especially if you commit as a group to change over the long term, there's countless examples in history where change is realized, and all of us here today are benefiting from people that have put sustained time and effort into values over the long term.
Yeah, just building on that about other organizations or individuals taking on the donut. What they saw in the city of Amsterdam basically was that the city of Amsterdam set this vision and goal, and then they communicated out this idea to the community. And within a very short while, there was a community organization that developed around promoting the idea of doughnut economics. And really, doughnut economics is asking for any organization of any scale to take a step back and look at its purpose as an organization and realign its purpose with the vision of the donut, which is operating within the ecological limits and meeting the needs of people, for whatever that means for your particular scale of operation. And the Doughnut Economics Lab has a very mapped out process by which any organization or even individuals can go through to evaluate their organization to see if it does align. And those are looking at things like the purpose of the organization, the networks by which it operates in, its governance structure, how it's owned, and then looking at its finances and aligning those different elements. And so the city of Amsterdam actually had this program called Doughnut Deals, where they put out a vision and an idea for a program and put it out to the community, and willing community members or organizations could go to meet that vision of what that donut deal was. But I think that it's I call on anybody on this call to go pick up Kate Rayworth's book and have a read of it, Doughnut Economics, to see sort of what is explained in there, and if that resonates with yourself and your particular realm of influence to apply these ideas.
Okay, thank you. Emery Hartley, Please turn on your camera and say what you'd like.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben and Tyler. It's been a really great discussion this morning. Thank you. I was wondering, we had lots of really good examples of where Doughnut Economics is kind of, City of Nanaimo is using that to, say, inform housing or GHG emissions policy. I was wondering if you had any examples where that's influenced land use change policy or land use policy in your comprehensive community plan? Thank you.
That's a great question. Like a really good question, and one that is on my mind almost daily. You know, I don't want to get too technical, but I think there's some questions around how do those Doughnut principles, how do they translate to things like zoning? How do they translate to things like development permits? And how does that come together comprehensively to see some of these principles realized? I don't think we're going to nail it through the current OCP review with respect to that, but I think what's important, and I think there's oftentimes we and I am probably more guilty of this than most, is like perfect can sometimes get in the way for me of progress. And I think what we'll see in this current OCP iteration here, hopefully when we do adopt it, is